The bookstore clerk saved me the last copy, then saved me a seat at coffee. I never thought my life would change because of a book that was almost sold out. But that's exactly what happened to me, Alex, just 6 months after I moved to this city where I knew absolutely no one. Moving to a new place is always challenging, but this particular move felt especially isolating. I'd left behind my small but tight-knit group of friends, my favorite coffee shop where the barista knew my order by heart, and the comfort of familiar streets and faces. The city, with its towering buildings and hurried pedestrians, seemed indifferent to my existence. I spent my first few months feeling like a ghost, drifting through crowded streets yet somehow completely invisible. Let me tell you why finding community matters so much. Humans are social creatures. We need connection like we need air. Research shows that loneliness can be as damaging to our health as smoking 15 cigarettes a day. I felt this acutely during those first months. I tried the usual routes to meeting people, awkward meetup groups where everyone seemed to already know each other, dating apps that led to superficial conversations that fizzled out after a day or two, and even striking up conversations with baristas who were paid to be nice to me. Nothing stuck. Nothing felt real. That's why the literary nook became my sanctuary. It wasn't just any bookstore. It was the kind of place where the wooden floors creaked with character, where the scent of paper and possibility hung in the air, and where time seemed to slow down the moment you stepped through the door. Floor-to-ceiling bookshelves created little nooks and crannies where you could get lost for hours. Mismatched armchairs were tucked into corners, inviting readers to sink in and disappear into different worlds. Soft jazz played in the background, just loud enough to be noticed, but quiet enough not to disturb the sacred act of reading. I started spending my Saturday afternoons there, finding comfort in being alone but surrounded by fellow book lovers. There's something uniquely comforting about being in the presence of others who share your passion, even if you never exchange a word. I'd watch people run their fingers along spines, their faces lighting up when finding a treasured title, and feel a sense of belonging I hadn't experienced since moving. The literary nook became the place where I could breathe, where the loneliness felt less crushing. It was on one of these Saturday afternoons that I was searching for The Invisible Hours, a novel that had been recommended to me countless times, but I had never gotten around to reading. The book had recently been featured on a popular podcast, causing a surge in demand. I've been thinking about it all week, looking forward to spending my weekend lost in its pages, perhaps sitting by the window of my apartment with a cup of tea, the city life continuing below while I escaped into fiction. As I scanned the shelves where it should have been, my heart sank. The space was empty. I must have looked particularly devastated because a voice behind me said, "Looking for The Invisible Hours?" I turned to find a guy about my age, wearing a blue apron with the Literary Nook's logo embroidered on the pocket. His name tag read Jamie. He had the kind of smile that reached his eyes, creating little crinkles at the corners that suggested he smiled often and meant it. "Yes, actually," I replied, trying not to sound as disappointed as I felt. "I guess I'm too late." Jamie's eyes lit up. "You're in luck. We had a rush on it earlier this week after that podcast feature, but I actually saved the last copy." When I looked confused, he added, "I noticed you in here most Saturdays, always in the literary fiction section. Thought you might be looking for it." I was stunned. "You noticed me?" The question came out before I could stop it, revealing more vulnerability than I'd intended. Jamie's cheeks flushed slightly. "It's kind of my job to notice what people read. Helps with recommendations." He motioned for me to follow him to the counter. "Plus, you have good taste. Anyone who spends 20 minutes deciding between Zadie Smith and Chimamanda Ngozi Adichie is someone who takes their reading seriously." As he retrieved the book from behind the counter, I took a moment to really look at him. Jamie had dark curly hair that fell slightly over his forehead, and he kept pushing it back with his hand in a way that seemed unconscious. His eyes were a warm brown, attentive and expressive. He moved with an easy confidence among the books, like he belonged there, like the books were extensions of himself. "So, what made you want to read this one?" he asked, handing me the novel. Our fingers brushed briefly, and I felt a small jolt that I immediately tried to dismiss. "I've heard it captures the feeling of being alone in a city full of people," I said, surprised at my own honesty. "That's something I can relate to right now." Jamie nodded, understanding in his eyes. "New to the city? Is it that obvious?" I laughed. "Let's just say I recognize the look. I had the same one when I moved here 3 years ago." He leaned against the counter. "The city can be a tough place to find your people." We fell into an easy conversation about books that capture loneliness, which led to talking about our favorite authors. which somehow led to discovering we both had an obsession with magical realism and a shared love for obscure science fiction from the 1970s. Jamie was knowledgeable without being pretentious, passionate without being overwhelming. He recommended books with the precision of someone who truly understood what made stories resonate with different people. "You know," he said, glancing at his watch, "my shift ends in 20 minutes. There's a great coffee shop next door, Café Literati. They have these amazing cardamom buns and the best chai in the city." He hesitated, and I saw a flash of vulnerability cross his face. "I could save you a seat if you wanted to continue this conversation." My heart raced. Was this just friendly bookseller chat, or something more? And did it matter? The prospect of spending more time talking about books with someone who clearly loved them as much as I did was appealing, regardless of what it might or might not lead to. "I'd like that," I said, surprising myself with my lack of hesitation. Jamie's smile widened. "Great. I'll meet you there in 20. As I browsed the store waiting for Jamie's shift to end, I couldn't help but second-guess myself. What was I doing? I barely knew this person. What if the conversation turned awkward once we left the safety of discussing books? What if he was just being nice because it was his job? What if I was reading too much into a simple coffee invitation? But beneath these doubts was a stronger feeling, a yearning for connection that had been building since I'd moved to the city. And there was something about Jamie that felt safe, genuine. The way he talked about books revealed a sensitivity and depth that intrigued me. I decided to quiet the anxious voice in my head and embrace the moment. Café Literati was exactly the kind of place you'd expect to find next to an independent bookstore. Edison bulbs hung from exposed beams, casting a warm glow over mismatched furniture that somehow worked together. Bookshelves lined one wall, filled with used books that customers could read while they sipped their coffee. Local art adorned the other walls, all for sale, creating a gallery-like atmosphere. The air was rich with the scent of freshly ground coffee beans and baked goods. I found a small table near the window and sat down, placing the invisible hours in front of me like a talisman. Through the glass, I could see people hurrying past, wrapped up in their own lives, their own stories. For the first time since moving to the city, I didn't feel like I was on the outside looking in. I was participating in my own story, taking a chance, however small. Jamie arrived exactly 20 minutes later, now without his apron, wearing a simple gray sweater that suited him well. He spotted me immediately and waved, his smile as genuine as it had been in the bookstore. As he made his way to the table, I noticed he was carrying a book of his own. "Thought I'd bring my current read," he explained, setting down a well-worn copy of The Night Circus, "in case we ran out of things to talk about." The way he said it, with a self-deprecating smile, made me think he was as nervous as I was, which was oddly comforting. "One of my favorites," I said, pointing to his book. "I love how it creates a world that feels magical but somehow still possible." Jamie's eyes lit up. "Exactly. That's what I love about magical realism. It makes you believe that magic could be just around the corner in our own world." He settled into his chair. "Let me get us some coffee and those cardamom buns I promised." "What's your poison?" "Chai latte, if they're as good as you claim," I challenged with a smile. "Oh, they're better," he assured me, heading to the counter. While Jamie ordered, I took a deep breath. This felt good. Normal. The kind of social interaction I'd been missing. When he returned with our drinks and pastries, the conversation flowed as easily as it had in the bookstore. We talked about our favorite books, of course, but also about our lives. Jamie had moved to the city for graduate school in literature, but had fallen in love with bookselling and decided to stay. I told him about my job as a graphic designer, how I worked remotely, which was convenient for the move but isolating. "That explains why you're at the bookstore every Saturday," Jamie said. "Working from home can be lonely." "It is," I admitted. "Some days I don't speak to anyone except my plants." "You talk to your plants?" Jamie asked, amusement dancing in his eyes. "Don't judge. They're excellent listeners," I defended, and we both laughed. As our conversation deepened, I found myself sharing things I hadn't told anyone in the city, how I'd moved here after a painful breakup, hoping for a fresh start, how I sometimes felt invisible in the crowd, how I missed having someone to share discoveries with, like a new book or a hidden cafe. Jamie listened attentively, nodding in understanding. "I get it," he said. "I spent my first year here feeling like I was shouting into a void. No one heard me. No one saw me. It wasn't until I started working at the literary nook that I found my community." "How did that happen?" I asked, genuinely curious about his journey from loneliness to belonging. "Slowly," he admitted. "First, it was just connecting with regular customers over books. Then some of us started a book club that meets monthly. Now I have people who text me when they find a book they know I'll love, who save me a seat at poetry readings, who notice if I haven't been around for a while. He smiled softly. It takes time, but it happens. The afternoon stretched into evening, and one chai latte turned into two. We discovered more shared interests, a love for old black and white films, a weakness for street food, a habit of reading the last page of a book first, a controversial practice we both defended vigorously. But we also had our differences. Jamie was an early riser who loved morning runs along the river. I was a night owl who believed mornings were an affront to humanity. He was methodical and organized. I thrived in creative chaos. These differences didn't create distance between us. Instead, they added texture to our conversation, making it more interesting. As the cafe began to fill with the evening crowd, our conversation took a more personal turn. Jamie mentioned his last relationship had ended because his partner couldn't understand his passion for literature and the hours he spent reading. He said I was in love with fictional characters more than real people, Jamie said, watching me carefully as he revealed this detail. I felt a flutter of recognition, both at the revelation that Jamie was gay and at the sentiment itself. I get that, I said. My ex used to say something similar, that I lived too much in my head, in stories. A look of relief crossed Jamie's face, followed by a warm smile. Some people don't understand that loving stories is a way of loving the world more deeply, not less. Exactly, I agreed, feeling a surge of connection. Books don't replace real connections, they help us understand them better. As the evening progressed, I found myself noticing small details about Jamie, the way he gestured with his hands when talking about a book he loved, how he remembered exactly how I took my chai after ordering just once. The genuine interest in his eyes when I spoke. There was an ease between us that felt rare and valuable. When Café Literati announced they were closing in 15 minutes, I was surprised to check my phone and discover we'd been talking for over 4 hours. The time had passed in what felt like moments. I can't believe it's this late, I said, gathering my things. I've completely monopolized your Saturday. Best Saturday I've had in a long time, Jamie replied with a sincerity that made my heart skip. As we stepped outside into the cool evening air, he added, the book club I mentioned meets next Friday at 7. We're discussing The Invisible Hours, actually. He nodded toward the book in my hand. You should come, if you're interested. No pressure, of course. I'd like that, I said, and meant it. We exchanged phone numbers, and Jamie insisted on walking me to the subway station. As we walked, our hands brushed occasionally, each touch sending a small thrill through me. At the entrance to the station, we paused. Suddenly awkward in the way people are when a wonderful time is ending and neither wants to be the first to leave. Thank you for saving me that book, I said, holding up The Invisible Hours. Thank you for letting me save you a seat, Jamie replied with a smile. And for making this bookstore clerk's day much more interesting than it would have been. We said goodbye with a promise to text, and as I descended into the subway, I felt lighter than I had in months. The city, which had seemed so cold and indifferent that morning, now felt full of possibility. True to his word, Jamie texted me the next day, a simple message asking if I'd started the book yet. This began a week of texting, discussions about what I thought of The Invisible Hours as I read it, recommendations for other books, and gradually, messages that had nothing to do with literature at all. Photos of his morning run by the river, questions about my day, silly observations that made me laugh. By the time Friday arrived, I was both excited and nervous about the book club. What if his friends didn't like me? What if I said something stupid about the book? What if the connection I felt with Jamie didn't translate to a group setting? The book club met in the back room of the literary nook, a cozy space with comfortable chairs arranged in a circle. Jamie was already there when I arrived, and the smile that lit up his face when he saw me quieted some of my anxiety. He introduced me to the group, a diverse collection of people united by their love of reading, and made sure I had a seat next to him. The discussion was lively and thoughtful, with perspectives I hadn't considered. I found myself contributing more than I expected, encouraged by Jamie's supportive nods and the group's respectful attention. Afterward, several members invited me to join them for drinks at a nearby bar, an invitation I gladly accepted. As the weeks passed, Jamie and I grew closer. Our coffee dates became a regular occurrence, expanding to include dinners, movie nights, and long walks through the city. He showed me his favorite hidden bookstores, and I introduced him to obscure graphic novel series I loved. We attended poetry readings together, sometimes holding hands in the dimly lit venues, our fingers intertwined as words of love and longing washed over us. But it wasn't all smooth sailing. About 2 months into our Whatever it was, we hadn't put a label on it. A misunderstanding threatened to derail everything. I stopped by the literary nook unexpectedly one afternoon to find Jamie in what appeared to be an intimate conversation with a handsome customer. They were laughing, standing close, and I saw the customer slip Jamie his phone number on a bookmark. Jealousy, insecurity, and the ghosts of past rejections all rose up at once. Instead of approaching them, I left without being seen, then canceled our plans that evening with a vague excuse. Jamie sensed something was wrong, but I brushed it off, retreating into the protective shell I'd built during my months of loneliness in the city. For a week, I kept my distance, responding to his text with brief, non-committal replies. I told myself I was being smart, protecting myself from inevitable disappointment. After all, Jamie was charming, handsome, and met interesting people every day at the bookstore. Why would he settle for someone like me? What I didn't expect was for Jamie to show up at my apartment building one rainy evening, holding a copy of The Invisible Hours over his head as a makeshift umbrella. "Your doorman let me up," he explained when I opened the door, surprised to find him there. I told him it was an emergency. A book emergency. Despite my determination to keep my emotional walls up, I couldn't help but smile. "A book emergency?" "The most serious kind," he said, stepping inside when I moved aside to let him in. His hair was damp from the rain, curling even more than usual. "You've been avoiding me, and I think I know why." My heart raced. "You do?" Jamie nodded, setting the now damp book on my coffee table. "You saw me with that guy at the bookstore last week, didn't you?" When I didn't deny it, he continued, "Alex, he was asking for book recommendations for his boyfriend's birthday. He gave me his number so I could text him when a special edition came in. That's all." I felt simultaneously relieved and foolish. "I jumped to conclusions," I admitted. "You did," Jamie agreed, but his tone was gentle. "And instead of talking to me about it, you pulled away." He moved closer, his eyes searching mine. "I need you to know something. I'm not interested in random customers, no matter how many phone numbers they give me. I'm interested in you. Only you." The sincerity in his voice broke through my defenses. "I'm sorry," I said. "It's just, I've been hurt before, and being in a new city, feeling so alone, it makes it harder to trust, to believe that something good could actually last." Jamie took my hands in his. "I understand that. I do. But Alex, I need you to talk to me when you're feeling insecure or scared. We both love books because they help us understand the human experience, right? So let's apply that to our own story. Let's communicate, even when it's hard." That night marked a turning point in our relationship. We stayed up late talking, really talking, about our fears, our past hurts, our hopes for the future. Jamie told me about his own insecurities, how he sometimes worried he wasn't exciting enough for me, that I might get bored with our bookstore and cafe routine. I assured him that after months of loneliness, the connection we shared was the most exciting thing in my life. 3 weeks later came the moment that would cement our relationship in my mind as something real and lasting. A famous author we both admired was doing a reading and signing at a large bookstore downtown. The event was packed, with people standing in the aisles and sitting on the floor. Jamie and I had arrived early enough to get seats, but had gotten separated when I went to use the restroom before the event started. When I returned, I couldn't find him in the crowd. Just as I was about to text him, I heard the author being introduced. As applause filled the room, I felt a tap on my shoulder. I turned to find Jamie, slightly out of breath. "I saved you a seat," he said, taking my hand and leading me through the crowd to the third row, where he had indeed saved me a seat, with his jacket draped over it. As we sat down, he didn't let go of my hand. The reading was beautiful, the author's words painting vivid pictures of love and loss and finding home in unexpected places. But what I remember most clearly is the warmth of Jamie's hand in mine, the way he would squeeze it gently when a particular passage moved him, the feeling that I was exactly where I belonged. After the reading, during the Q&A session, Jamie raised his hand and was called on. My heart swelled with pride as he asked a thoughtful question about the author's use of magical elements as metaphors for emotional connections. The author seemed impressed, engaging with Jamie's question at length. But then Jamie did something unexpected. "I have one more thing to say, if that's okay," he said, and the author nodded encouragingly. Jamie turned slightly toward me, though he was still addressing the room. "I just wanted to say that books have always been my first love, but they've also led me to other loves." His eyes met mine, warm and certain, like this amazing guy sitting next to me, who I met when he came looking for a book that was almost sold out. I saved him the last copy, and it was the best decision I ever made. A collective awe swept through the audience, and I felt my face flush with a mixture of embarrassment and joy. The author smiled broadly. Now that, she said, is the kind of love story I wish I'd written. After the event, as we waited in line for the book signing, I nudged Jamie with my shoulder. I can't believe you did that, I said, but I was smiling. Too much? He asked, looking slightly worried. No, I assured him, squeezing his hand. It was perfect. Though I think you just made us characters in about 50 different stories that people in that audience are going to go home and write. Jamie laughed. Good. Our story deserves to be told. He paused, suddenly serious. Alex, I know it's only been a few months, but I need you to know, I'm falling in love with you. The words hung between us, honest and vulnerable. In that moment, surrounded by books and the murmur of literary conversations, I felt a certainty I hadn't experienced in years. I'm falling in love with you too, I replied, the words coming easily, naturally. When we reached the author for our signing, she looked up at us and smiled knowingly. Oh, the bookstore couple, she said. What name shall I make this out to? Alex and Jamie, I said, and hearing our names together like that felt right in a way I couldn't quite explain. She signed the book with a flourish, then handed it to us. To Alex and Jamie, she'd written, May your story have all the magic of fiction and all the truth of real love. In the months that followed, Jamie and I created our own rituals and traditions. Sunday mornings at Café Literati, reading sections of the newspaper to each other over coffee and pastries. Wednesday evening walks through different neighborhoods, discovering hidden bookstores and quirky shops. A shared shelf in each of our apartments, where we left books for each other with notes tucked inside. The book club became a fixture in my life. Those once strangers, now friends who texted me directly about upcoming meetings and saved me cookies from the refreshment table. Through them, I met other people, expanding my circle in the city that had once felt so cold and unwelcoming. Jamie and I had our disagreements, of course. We argued about books. He thought the ending of a popular trilogy was perfect. I thought it betrayed the character development. We bickered about practical things, like the best way to organize a bookshelf, alphabetically by author, obviously, though Jamie made a compelling case for organizing by color. But even in our disagreements, there was respect and affection. 6 months after our first meeting at the Literary Nook, Jamie and I stood in that same spot between the fiction shelves, his arms around my waist, mine around his neck. Do you remember what you were wearing that day? He asked, his forehead resting against mine. My blue sweater, I said. And you had on that Literary Nook apron with the coffee stain on the pocket. I was so nervous talking to you, he admitted. I'd noticed you coming in for weeks, always wanted to recommend a book to you, but could never work up the courage. Really? You seemed so confident. Jamie laughed softly. I'd been practicing what to say to you. When I saw you looking for The Invisible Hours, it felt like fate giving me an opening. I'm glad fate stepped in, I said, kissing him gently. Me too, he murmured against my lips. Best plot twist ever. As we stood there, surrounded by books filled with countless stories of love and connection, I realized that our own story was just beginning. There would be more chapters to write, more plot twists to navigate, more character development for both of us. But for the first time since moving to the city, I wasn't afraid of the blank pages ahead. With Jamie by my side, I was excited to see what we would write together. The bookstore clerk had saved me the last copy of a book I wanted, then saved me a seat at coffee. But what he really saved was something much more precious, the possibility of belonging, of connection, of love in a city that had felt too big and too indifferent for too long. And for that, I would be forever grateful. Total _char_count, 18,879.